I was very shocked and surprised that a single signature could destroy trust for a lifetime, but the pen in my hand felt heavier than any hammer I had ever swung. Retirement was supposed to be simple. Early walks through the neighborhood, a quiet mug of coffee on the porch, the steady rhythm of a rocking chair easing me into dusk. My name is Paul Reynolds, 65 years old, a former carpenter from Dayton, Ohio, and a believer, until recently, in the unbreakable bond between a father and his only child. Lucas had always been persuasive. As a boy, he once convinced a whole Little League team to swap positions mid-game because he decided left field was too lonely. As an adult, he carried that same boyish charm, his words smooth as varnish on fresh pine. The afternoon he arrived with his wife, Emily, they brought homemade brownies and a grin that reminded me of the missing front tooth he'd flashed at 8 years old. We sat at the kitchen table where every birthday candle and report card had once been celebrated. "We got pre-approved," Lucas said, eyes bright. "It's just a bridge loan so we can buy the new house before ourselves. But the bank wants someone with an established credit profile to co-sign." "Dad, your score is pristine." Emily laid a hand over mine. "Please, Paul. It's temporary. 6 months tops." I had spent 4 decades paying every bill on time, turning down offers that felt even slightly shaky. But Lucas pleaded, promising weekly updates, spreadsheets, interest and cash. I thought of the dented station wagon they were escaping, the growing curve of Emily's belly, my first grandchild on the horizon, and the way Lucas still called me Pops. My signature landed on the dotted line, and when Lucas hugged me, his shoulders trembled with relief. The first inkling that something was wrong came 2 weeks later when my Tuesday morning voicemail pinged empty. Lucas never missed our weekly check-ins. I texted, then called. Silence echoed back. By Thursday, every number I dialed slid straight to voicemail. Emily's social media pages vanished. The brownies and smiles now tasted like sawdust in my throat. A month passed. The first payment notice arrived in a crisp white envelope that looked harmless until I opened it. The amount due eclipsed my monthly pension. I dipped into savings, rationalizing that a missed call could be an accident, that an email glitch might have swallowed their replies, that they would appear any minute with apologies and explanations. I told myself these stories because the alternative, that my own flesh and blood had orchestrated a betrayal, seemed impossible. But payments multiplied like weeds. 2 months in, I sold my fishing boat. 3 months, my workshop tools. Every sacrifice felt like carving a sliver of myself away. I was downsizing my life to keep afloat someone else's dream. On a humid August morning, an unfamiliar number lit up my phone. Relief surged as I answered, expecting Lucas. Instead, a message appeared, a text so cold it frosted the screen. "If you don't keep paying, we'll drag you into court, old man." "Don't be stupid." My hand shook. I reread the words until they blurred. The sender ID resolved into Lucas's number, the same digits etched into my memory beside his birthday and his first home run. Shock melted into a quiet, dense anger, heavy and immovable, like an anvil pinned to my chest. I met with my old Army buddy, Marcus Hayes, now a seasoned attorney. His office smelled of leather and resolve. Marcus listened without interrupting, then opened a yellow legal pad. "They exploited undue influence," he said. "Coercion by a family member can invalidate a contract. We'll subpoena communication records, prove deceptive intent, and petition to reassign the debt." Court proceedings moved slower than sap in January, but each motion Marcus filed felt like fitting another joint on a sturdy frame. Discovery unearthed damning details. Lucas had hidden late tax bills, inflated income on the application, and, worst of all, recorded a voicemail between him and Emily that ended with her saying, "Your dad's too soft. He'll sign anything for you." Hearing that audio in a sterile conference room made me flinch as though a nail gun had misfired. Yet it steeled my spine. The shame that had bent me was replaced by purpose. I had spent my life driving nails straight. Now I'd drive truth into daylight. The weeks that preceded the trial were filled with paperwork and midnight strategy sessions. Marcus urged me to chronicle every interaction I could recall, so I sat at my dining room table, surrounded by shoeboxes of receipts and fading photo albums, writing until my thumbs cramped. Each line charted the slow erosion of trust, the way Lucas avoided eye contact the morning after I signed, the sudden renovations he bragged about on social media before his accounts went dark. The inexplicable charge for a designer crib ordered the very week I sold my grandfather's watch. My neighbor, Mrs. Dalton, a retired librarian with a fondness for mint tea, came by one afternoon and caught me staring blankly at a mound of documents. She set her teapot on a coaster shaped like a maple leaf and offered a single sentence that stuck to my ribs. "Account for every nickel, Paul. Truth hides in the pennies people overlook." Her advice became a mantra. I cross-checked statements until numbers imprinted on my eyelids. Each discovery stiffened Marcus's resolve and tightened the latticework of our case. Depositions followed. Emily arrived wearing oversized sunglasses, hair tucked under a silk scarf that failed to disguise the tension in her jaw. Lucas showed up late, claiming a plumbing emergency. Under oath, they contradicted each other over simple facts: who first proposed the loan, whether they'd promised to reimburse me. Their stories frayed like cheap rope, and Marcus collected every loose thread. In a private moment during a break, Lucas approached me near the vending machines. Bright fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as he stuffed his hands into the pockets of an expensive blazer. "You could still drop this, Dad," he murmured, glancing around as though the tiled corridor held microphones. "We'll handle the payments eventually. Why drag family into court?" "Family put us here," I replied, voice level. "I taught you to own your mistakes." His mouth twisted into something between a sneer and a grimace. "You always loved teaching lessons." I looked at him, really looked, searching for the boy who once begged me to coach his t-ball team. All I saw was a man afraid of the consequences he'd sown. He turned away first, and the hum of the vending machine filled the silence. Emily never met my gaze again after that day. Whether guilt or strategy kept her distant, I couldn't tell. I reminded myself not to pity either of them. Pity dulls the edge of justice. Marcus filed motions to secure my financial records, demonstrating how each loan payment had gutted my savings. We attached affidavits from my bank manager, my financial planner, even my pharmacist, testifying to the canceled prescriptions I could no longer afford. Marcus understood the power of narrative in a courtroom. It wasn't just about breach of contract. It was about an old man choosing between medicine and a mortgage he never owned. He also enlisted a handwriting expert who noted the rushed, shake-laden script in my signature, supporting our argument of emotional coercion. The bank's own loan officer testified, reluctantly, that Lucas and Emily had met with her alone before bringing me in, and that certain risk disclosures had mysteriously disappeared from the documents I signed. Piece by piece, Marcus built an ironclad frame, each fact a dowel reinforcing the structure. At night, long after Marcus had driven back to the suburban home and my own lights flickered off, I lay awake listening to the creak of the house. Aging wood groans in the dark, expanding and contracting with temperature swings, a language I learned from years on construction sites. The house seemed to speak to me, reminding me of every nail I'd driven true, every measurement I double-checked. If my craft demanded precision and integrity, why should building a legal defense require any less? I slept little. Coffee replaced dinner more than once. Yet exhaustion never eclipsed determination. Friends offered to testify about my character. I politely declined, unwilling to drag them into the spotlight. Pride, perhaps, but also an understanding that this was my storm to weather. The evening before the trial, I visited Mom's grave for the first time in months. Autumn leaves blanketed the grass. Kneeling, I spoke aloud, telling her I was scared but steady. Her memory steadied my hands far more than any caffeine. Trial morning, Marcus handed me a freshly ironed tie, navy with thin silver stripes. "Presentation matters," he said. I nodded, fastening the knot with practiced fingers. Grandpa Reynolds had taught me how to tie a tie the day of my first high school dance. Memory braided into fabric and resolve. Inside the courtroom, each creak of the bench echoed like thunder. The bailiff's voice boomed, calling for order. Lucas sat 2 rows ahead, shoulders rigid. Emily dabbed her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Gone were the social media smiles, gone the carefree laughter I once mistook for maturity. What remained was fear and the dawning understanding that consequences do not negotiate. Marcus opened with a concise statement, painting a picture of betrayal. He displayed charts illustrating the timeline of payments and the rapid depletion of my savings. He projected screenshots of my unanswered texts, polite inquiries evolving into worried pleas. The jury watched in silence. Even the judge's frown seemed to deepen. Lucas's attorney attempted a counter-narrative, that the loan had been a family arrangement, that I had volunteered cheerfully, that my alleged distress was retroactive storytelling. But Marcus dismantled each claim with receipts. When Lucas testified, Marcus coaxed him down labyrinths of his own fabrication until Lucas contradicted himself twice within 5 minutes. Emily's testimony was worse. She tried to adopt a tone of regret, but audio recordings projected her earlier cynicism for all to hear. The jury's faces hardened. One woman shook her head slowly, as though unable to fathom such callousness toward a parent. During recess, I walked outside and leaned against a stone pillar, breathing in crisp air that smelled faintly of snow. Strangers passed, unaware of the personal war waged within those walls. For a moment, melancholy pressed close. I had raised Lucas to be honest, to help neighbors, to respect family. Where had the lesson failed? Was his betrayal my fault? The thought cut deeper than any financial wound. But I remembered Marcus's words. Guilt is a carpenter's level. Use it to check alignment, not to hammer yourself. I inhaled, exhaled, and returned inside ready to finish what we'd started. Closing arguments arrived. Marcus spoke of my sacrifices, how I had taught Lucas to ride a bike, how I had rebuilt the porch after a tornado so Lucas could celebrate his prom on it. He referenced my age, my limited income, and the greater principle that coercion by those we love can be more devastating than any stranger's scam. His voice resonated with the quiet authority of someone who had seen battlefield justice and believed in a better version. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, their verdict delivered recompense and validation. I didn't cheer. Relief came in a single, controlled breath. My life's frame had held under stress. The judge, a stern woman with sharp glasses, delivered her ruling after a brief recess. She declared the loan fraudulent under duress, voided my liability, reassigned the debt solely to Lucas, and ordered restitution of every dollar I had scraped together. Her gavel struck like a final nail, sealing a coffin of deceit. Lucas's shoulders collapsed. Emily sobbed openly. I felt no triumph, only a weary release, like unloading a burden too long carried. Outside, Marcus clapped my back. You stood your ground, he said. That's what fathers do. Weeks later, a certified check arrived covering the restitution. I deposited it without ceremony. The bank clerk asked if I'd like crisp bills. I shook my head. Money, I had learned, was only paper until someone coated it with trust or treachery. I sold my house, too full of memories now soured, and bought a smaller place near the river where the morning fog drifts like forgiveness over water. I rebuilt a modest workshop, the scent of fresh-cut cedar reminding me that creation still beats destruction. Friends ask if I'll ever call Lucas. I answer honestly. The phone sits silent, but its line remains open. Forgiveness is a door I keep unlocked, though I no longer stand waiting behind it. In quieter moments, I trace the journey from signature to verdict, and I understand that love, like wood, must be seasoned and true or it warps under pressure. My story is not one of vengeance, but of reclamation, of a man who learned that even when your own blood bends the grain of your life, you can still plane the edges, sand the surface, and finish it with courage. So I live my days deliberately, a fresh pot of coffee at dawn, the river rolling steady beyond the porch, and a future carved from solid truth rather than hollow promises. I harbor no illusions, but I harbor hope, the quiet, sturdy kind that doesn't need guarantees. Letters from Lucas began to arrive every few weeks, each one humbler than the last. He wrote of therapy sessions that cracked open his justifications, of evening classes in financial literacy, of working overtime stocking lumber at a hardware store. He ended every letter with the same line. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Dad. I'm working to deserve it. I wrote back sparingly, choosing words as carefully as a carpenter selects finished nails, enough to hold but not to split the delicate grain of new beginnings. Across ink and distance, we rebuilt something sturdier than the blind trust that had failed us, accountability. When spring thawed the river and robins returned, Lucas drove up in an aging pickup with a bed full of cedar planks. He asked to help construct a new garden shed. We worked side by side, silent at first, then trading small talk, then sharing stories of old job sites and newer regrets. Each board we raised felt like a step across the gap between us. At sunset we rested, sweat drying, hands smelling of wood and second chances. Lucas glanced at me, eyes clear. Thank you for letting me earn this, he said. I nodded. Thank you for putting in the work. That evening, under a sky streaked with gold, I realized the final lesson of my ordeal. Even when trust is shattered, the pieces can be joined with stronger joints than before, dovetails of honesty, glue of accountability, clamps of time and effort. And every evening thereafter, when the sun dipped and shadows stretched across the workshop floor, I locked up, brushed the sawdust from my hands, and stepped into twilight lighter than before, knowing the structure of my life stands square, level, and wholly mine. Yet open to the son who is learning, board by board, to build his own integrity. Time, like a patient craftsman, kept sanding the rough edges of our fractured bond. Summer settled in, warm and thick, and every Sunday Lucas drove out to my place before the heat haze rippled over the fields. We replaced the garden shed's roof, swapped rusted hinges on the chicken coop I never used anymore, and built a canoe rack near the river even though neither of us owned a canoe yet. The work mattered less than the rhythm. Measure, cut, breathe, talk. During coffee breaks, Lucas shared stories of the customers he met at the hardware store, veterans who bought one screw at a time because pensions were thin, newlyweds choosing paint colors with starry-eyed optimism, teenagers buying their first set of wrenches with lawn mowing money. He spoke of them with respect, almost reverence, sensing how each small purchase carried dreams. Listening, I recognized empathy sprouting where entitlement had once taken root. One Saturday afternoon, Emily arrived unannounced. She parked a compact sedan at the edge of the driveway and stepped out slowly, holding a stack of legal folders against her chest like a shield. Her hair, once glossy and styled, hung loose, and her eyes seemed softer than I remembered. Lucas stiffened beside me. I set down my hammer and waited. Emily approached, offering a quiet greeting. She said she'd finalized the separation papers and wanted to discuss custody arrangements for the baby due in winter, a baby I hadn't known survived the turmoil. The news struck me harder than any gavel. A grandchild, living proof that futures can emerge from flawed histories. Emily explained she planned to raise the child near her parents in Oregon. Lucas swallowed, clearly torn between responsibility and the realistic limits of distance. I asked to see the ultrasound picture she clutched in one of the folders. Emily hesitated, then handed it over. Grainy black and white arcs formed a tiny silhouette inside a dark circle. I felt my pulse in my fingertips, a heartbeat echoing a heartbeat. Later, in the quiet of the workshop, Lucas said, "I thought I'd have time to fix things before the baby came." "Fixing things," I replied, "isn't a rush job. It's a lifetime warranty you renew every day." We talked late into the night. Lucas admitted fear of failing his child the way he felt he'd failed me. I shared my own fear that my stubborn silence might push him down the same road again out of despair. We agreed to keep the conversation alive, to let honesty outrank pride. As August waned, Marcus visited for barbecue and sweet tea. He inspected the new shed, tapping the frame approvingly, then joined us on the porch. Conversation drifted from court anecdotes to parenting advice. Marcus told Lucas that children notice effort more than perfection. "They remember who shows up," he said, "even when the porch light flickers." In September, Lucas asked if he could store a few baby furniture kits in my workshop. Together we assembled a crib, sanding each rail until splinters surrendered. I watched him run fingers along the finished surface, ensuring smoothness. "No sharp edges," he murmured. "The little one deserves better than that." Winter's first snow dusted the cedar shingles the day Lucas called from the hospital. His daughter arrived early but healthy. He named her Grace. Over the phone, his voice cracked as he described the way her tiny fist wrapped around his finger. That night I stepped outside, snowflakes swirling beneath the porch light, and whispered her name into the cold air. Grace. A week later I flew to Oregon, nerves jangling like loose nails in a bucket. Hospitals always smelled of bleach and hushed urgency, but when I cradled Grace the world fell silent. Her eyes fluttered open, blue like a winter sky, and her breath warmed the space just beneath my collarbone. Emily, pale and exhausted, thanked me for coming. There was fragility between us, but also a tentative peace. Lucas hovered, alternating between apologetic glances toward Emily and proud beams in my direction. He introduced me to every nurse who walked by. "This is my dad, Paul." Each repetition threaded another stitch into the garment of our renewed family. At the hotel that night, I counted the months since the lawsuit ended. 12. 12 months from rupture to reunion. I realized forgiveness isn't a finish line, but a lane we choose each morning. Some mornings we veer, but the lane remains, waiting. Back in Ohio, the river iced over, transforming flowing water into a glassy path for winter birds. I spent evenings crafting a rocking horse for Grace, oak frame, walnut mane, maple seat. On its belly, I carved a tiny inscription, built with lessons learned. When spring sun melted the last snow, I shipped it west, imagining her laughter filling the hollows I had carved. Lucas's payments continued without fail. Each month he enclosed a handwritten note summarizing his budget, the sacrifices, the successes, the temptations resisted. He wrote about attending a parenting group, about moments of doubt eased by midnight lullabies, about discovering patience inside himself he didn't know existed. When the loan balance finally hit zero, exactly 4 years after the verdict, Lucas drove 8 hours overnight and knocked on my door at dawn. He carried a simple wooden box wrapped in twine. Inside lay every canceled check, every payment slip, each one stamped, paid in full. Beneath the stack rested his original text message, the cruel one he had sent years ago, printed on plain paper, words stark and ugly. A red diagonal line crossed it out. Lucas met my eyes. "I wanted a concrete reminder of who I was," he said, "and evidence of who I choose to be now." I closed the lid gently. "Keep it," I told him. "Shadows teach us to appreciate light." Yet he insisted I take it, claiming the lesson belonged to both of us. That evening we sat by the river as fireflies rose, and Lucas recited a pledge he had written for himself, to live transparently, to teach Grace the value of earned trust, to never again lean on deceit when fear knocks. I listened, aware that promises are only as strong as the actions that follow, but believing in the possibility. The next morning, he left early to catch a flight back to Oregon, but not before fixing the squeaky hinge on my front gate without fanfare. It swung silently after he drove away, a small testament to quiet improvement. Years drifted past in ripples. Grace grew tall. Photos in my mailbox captured her first steps, her first toolbox, plastic but symbolic, and her first successful treehouse tea party. Lucas sent a letter every month, but the enclosed check stopped once the debt was gone. Instead, he enclosed drawings from Grace, report cards, anecdotes of how she insisted on measuring everything twice because Grandpa says so. I visited yearly, each trip revealing new layers of healing. Emily remarried, a gentle man who respected Lucas's role. They navigated co-parenting with civility, showing Grace that adults can disagree without destroying. On Grace's 10th birthday, she asked to spend the summer in Ohio. Lucas agreed. In that June, a lanky girl with paint-splattered sneakers bounded off the plane. She carried a travel journal titled Grandpa Adventures, already half filled with sketches. Over 8 weeks, we built a tree swing, patched the old canoe rack into usefulness, and floated down the river in a rented canoe, water lapping against hull, sky wide and forgiving. One muggy afternoon, Grace asked, "Why did Dad need your help with money before I was born?" The question hung in the air. I paused my sanding block and explained mistakes, fear, and the way people sometimes hurt those closest to them. She listened, brow furrowed, then said, "But he fixed it." I smiled. Yes, we fixed it together. That night she pinned in her journal, "People can mess up big and still make things better if they keep trying." Reading her words later, I felt the arc of a story much larger than debt and courtrooms, one that curved toward redemption. When Grace returned to Oregon, she left a carved keepsake box beside my workshop lathe. Inside lay 2 items, the inscription plate from the rocking horse, and a note that read, "Thank you for teaching Dad to build strong things, including our family." I traced the handwriting steady, deliberate. 10 years old and already building. My beard is wider now, my gait slower, but every dawn the porch welcomes me with the same steady creak. I brew coffee, gaze at the river, and count blessings like mortises fitted to tenants, snug, numerous, essential. The loan that once threatened to drown me has become driftwood carried away by time, replaced by sturdier beams of connection. When neighbors ask about the shed, the canoe rack, the handmade crib stored in pieces for the next generation, I tell them each board holds a chapter. They chuckle, thinking I speak in metaphors. Maybe I do. Yet beneath every nail lies a true thing. Love can fracture, but hands guided by humility and perseverance can plane splinters into smooth grain. I write this now at my roll-top desk, the same one Lucas spilled ink on when he was 7. The pages ahead remain blank, awaiting stories Grace and her father will craft. My part, I've learned, is to leave the tools within reach, offer guidance when asked, and trust the strength of the joints we've rebuilt. And if ever a day comes when doubt returns, I'll walk to the riverbank, skip a stone across surface, and remember how water, though split by force, closes gently behind the ripple, whole again.